Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come back to order. We have been in recess. There were votes on the floor. There was also a security incident outside of the Capitol. We cannot thank the Capitol Hill Police, the Metro Police, enough for what they do on a daily basis. So much of that is behind the scenes that we never see. But when there is an issue, we thank them. We thank them for their professionalism and for the work that they do to make sure that this complex and this body is a safe and secure place. And so with that, our next, we were in a markup. The next item for under consideration is H.R. 2319, the Electronic Message Preservation Act of 2015. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 2319, the Electronic Message Preservation Act of 2015.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. Now I'd like to recognize the sponsor of the bill, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings, for 5 minutes to explain his piece of legislation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your support for moving this bill today. The Electronic Message Preservation Act would ensure that email records from Federal agencies in the White House are preserved. According to the National Archives and Records Administration, approximately 73% of agencies continue to print and file hard copies of email messages. This means that these records are more likely to get lost and that they are harder for the agency to retrieve during record searches under the Freedom of Information Act. This bill would require the archivists of the United States to issue regulations mandating that by the end of this year, all Federal agencies manage and preserve their email records electronically. This would simply codify what agencies are already required to do under a directive issued by the archivist and director of OMB in 2012. Archivist David Ferriero has said he supports the goals of this bill. In his words, and I quote, "The government cannot be open and accountable if it does not preserve and cannot find its records," end of quote. This bill would also direct the archivists to establish standards for the preservation and management of email records that are presidential records, and to annually certify that the White House has records management controls in place that meet those standards. Under the bill, the archivist must report 1 year after the President leaves office on whether the controls used by the President met the required standards. The White House currently has a system in place that captures emails, performs automatic backups, and provides a searchable online archive. However, previous administrations have experienced significant problems with archiving emails. This legislation would ensure that every President has the controls in place that are necessary to preserve emails and other electronic records. This bill would ensure that we have a complete historical record. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. This is a good bill that Congressman Cummings has been championing and pushing for some time. I stand in support of it. As I think we all know, the Federal Government urgently needs to modernize its record-keeping infrastructure. And despite the significant shift to electronic communication over the last 2 decades, many of the Federal agencies still use a print-to-file method of electronic record preservation. Systems requiring paper copies of electronic records are inefficient, unnecessarily complicated, prone to error and loss. H.R. 2319 would help address this issue by codifying the requirement that agencies preserve electronically created records by the end of this calendar year. This requirement will help close a number of gaps in the current law and ensure Federal agencies are using methods approved and standardized by the National Archives and Records Administration to capture and store all their electronic records. It's a good bill. I appreciate Congressman Cummings insisting on moving this bill forward, and I stand in wholehearted support. I yield back. Do any other members wish to speak on the bill? Are there any amendments to the bill? If none, the question is now on the adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 2319 to the House of Representatives. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, nay. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item up for consideration is H.R. 4419, the District of Columbia Judicial Financial Transparency Act. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 4419, the District of Columbia Judicial Financial Transparency Act.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. I'd like to start by recognizing the sponsor bill, the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, for 5 minutes to explain the legislation.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you for bringing this bill for consideration. The district courts are Article I courts that come under federal jurisdiction, which is why this bill is before the committee. The Senate version, by the way, has already been reported out of the comparable committee in May of this year. To summarize, the bill enhances or indeed buttresses in financial disclosure for the D.C. courts, for the D.C. court judges, to bring them in line with the disclosure requirements for Article III judges. Not sure why they weren't in line before, but they were required to submit information about income and investments, liabilities, and gifts. But the judges' connections to charities, private organizations, businesses, and honorariums did not have to be public if they were more than $300. Including honorariums. They already submit financial information. The point of this bill is to make it public in the same way that Article III information is made public. I will also have an additional, an amendment to include an additional provision from Senator Lankford's bill. This provision will give the district court new authorities to further improve their operations, and Congress has full authority to make these changes, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentlewoman. I now recognize myself. H.R. 4419 to provide the more robust and open disclosure of judicial finances in the district. Currently, the district has a less vigorous disclosure requirement for its judges than we do for the federal government. H.R. 4419 corrects that discrepancy and brings financial disclosures required by the district judges more in line with those required by federal judges. This bill would require judges to disclose sources of income for themselves and their spouses so as to protect the public's interest in what is supposed to be an impartial judicial system. The bill also requires judges to make these reports available to the public 3 years after they are filed, as well as make fraudulent reports grounds for removal from office. It's a piece of good governance. I appreciate Ms. Norton for bringing this bill forward. I encourage its passage. With that, I yield back. Mr. Cummings is now recognized.
Chairman, I'll be very brief. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, this bill would enhance the financial disclosure requirements for judges on the local District of Columbia courts. It would make those disclosure requirements similar to those of judges on the federal courts, thereby increasing transparency in the D.C. courts. Mr. Chairman, this is a very good bill, and I strongly support it and urge members to vote for it. And with that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Does any other member wish to speak on the bill? Does any member have an amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I do have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 4419, offered by Ms. Norton of the District of Columbia.
The gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, is recognized for 5 minutes to explain the amendment. And without objection, the amendment is considered as read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to add sections that are already in Senator Lankford's bill. Comes out of his suggestions. These provisions would authorize magistrate judges to serve in the probate division, which would help address the increasing number of adult guardianship cases. It would allow the courts to accept payments by credit card and check. Courts are still somewhere back in the 20th century, and therefore reduce administrative costs and increase efficiency. It would increase maximum amount in controversy for small claims court from $5,000 to $10,000, which would be the first increase in 20 years and would ensure access to the courts for plaintiffs with limited means, and would authorize the chief judges to delegate their authority to approve reimbursements to court-appointed attorneys. Currently, the chief judge must personally approve these reimbursements, which adds to the administrative workload and diverts attention and resources away from more critical legal issues facing the court. I yield back and urge that this amendment be adopted.
The chair would recommend accepting this amendment. Is any other member wish to be heard on the amendment? If none, the question is now on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there any further amendments to the bill? If none, the question is now on the adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 4419 as amended to the House of Representatives. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 5033, the Getting Results Through Enhanced Accountability and Transparency Act of 2016. Clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 5033, the Getting Results Through Enhanced Accountability and Transparency Act of 2016.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. I understand the sponsor of the bill, the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Duckworth, will offer an amendment in the nature of the substitute to the bill. Without objection, we will call up the amendment in the nature of the substitute and then recognize Ms. Duckworth to give one statement on both the ANS and the underlying bill.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5033, offered by Ms. Duckworth.
Now, I'd like to recognize Ms. Duckworth for
He's
5
the
minutes
one
and
that-
explain the
other
legislation
comes
and her
Is
ANS.
here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and the ranking member for agreeing to mark up the GREAT Act. I also want to express my appreciation to Congressman Russell for partnering with me on this bipartisan bill. Our good government legislation has a simple goal: help agencies eliminate wasteful duplication, get rid of confusing fragmentation, and most importantly, save taxpayers' dollars. It is important to note that our bill does not create a new government office or entity. Instead, our bipartisan proposal seeks to improve existing laws and to enhance ongoing initiatives aimed at eliminating government waste. I urge all members to support this common sense bill. And then I'd also like to chat a little bit about the rest of the act, which is it amends current law to ensure federal agencies address recommendations in the nonpartisan GAO annual report on fragmentation, overlap, and duplication. Many of the topics identified in the GAO's report are complex and difficult to solve by any single agency. Sustained leadership and continual oversight, therefore, is required to identify unnecessary duplication that can be eliminated and to enhance coordination among government programs with related but distinct missions to achieve shared goals. And I thank you for marking this up, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Every year, I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Every year, the federal government inefficiencies, poor coordination, and unnecessary duplication waste taxpayer dollars. Since 2011, the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, has issued 6 annual reports on duplication, fragmentation, overlap, and other opportunities for potential cost savings. In those reports, GAO has identified more than 600 corrective actions to resolve unnecessary duplication and to achieve other cost savings. Despite the federal government fully addressing less than 50% of the GAO's recommendation, the GAO estimates that the federal government has already achieved nearly $125 billion in savings through the year 2025. This bill elevates the importance of identifying and correcting unnecessary duplication and improving interagency coordination across government. The bill requires agencies to incorporate resolving unnecessary duplication into their ongoing systematic review of operations. The bill also requires agencies to respond to GAO recommendations in the duplication report and the GAO's biennial high-risk report. we have got to listen to the GAO. I'm not saying they get every single thing right, but shame on us if we don't actually listen to the good work that the GAO does to go in and study and analyze these and try to take a bird's eye view of what needs to happen. So I commend the gentlewoman from Illinois, as well as Mr. Russell, for highlighting this and coming up with something that will further allow for the transparency, but also the urgency to get it done, because these agencies aren't going to want to have to come back and report on this, and forcing them to take that step, I think, will go a long way in actually solving the problem. So with that, I yield back. Does any other member wish to be heard? Yes,
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Cummings is now recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 5033 is exactly the kind of bill that this committee should consider. I want to thank Representative Duckworth for her leadership on this very important legislation. This bipartisan bill would make the Federal Government more efficient. Measuring and eliminating unnecessary duplication and waste in the Federal Government is something that we can all support. This bill would direct agency heads and their staffs to focus on improving coordination with other agencies and reducing unnecessary duplication. The bill also would direct the Government Accountability Office to include estimates of the potential cost savings of reducing unnecessary duplication in its annual reports. Mr. Chairman, this requirement would help provide Congress and the public with information about how the government can better spend taxpayer money. The Senate companion on this bill, which was introduced by Senators Carper and Johnson, was approved by the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee in May. With that, Mr. Chairman, I urge all our members to vote in favor of the bill. And again, I want to thank Ms. Duckworth and Mr. Russell for taking the leadership on this. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Does anybody else, does any other member wish to speak on the ANS or the underlying bill? Are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? If not, the question is now on the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Duckworth. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The question is now on the adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 5033 as amended to the House of Representatives. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 5037, the District of Columbia Courts and Public Defender Service Voluntary Separation Incentive Payments Act. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 5037, the District of Columbia Courts and Public Defender Service Voluntary Separation Incentive Payments Act.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. We'd now like to recognize the sponsor of the bill, the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, for 5 minutes to explain the legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I explained before that the bill involving the D.C. courts was before this committee because the D.C. courts are Article I courts. The D.C. Public Defender Service is a hybrid whose costs and oversight were transferred to the federal government because it is a state agency, and the district alone paid for the cost of state agency, which became too much for a single city. That is why that bill falls under this committee. The District of Columbia Courts and Public Defender Service Voluntary Separation Incentive Payments Act really makes only minor changes to the authorities of the courts and the Public Defender Service, placing these entities in the same position as their federal counterparts for more effective management and operation. The bill would give the D.C. courts and the Public Defender Service the same authority federal agencies and federal courts already have to offer voluntary separation incentive payments or buyouts to their employees. The fiscal year 2016 Omnibus Bill already gives D.C. courts buyout authority, but my bill would make this authority permanent and would extend it to the Public Defender Service in addition to the courts. Buyouts would allow the D.C. courts and the Public Defender Service to respond to their future administrative and budget needs and would provide the flexibility to extend buyout offers to their employees. the U.S. Government Accountability Office has determined that voluntary separation incentive payments may be made only where statutorily authorized. Where federal agencies and federal courts have the statutory authority to offer buyouts, while other federal agencies have that authority, Public Defender Service and the D.C. courts have not been expressly permitted to permanently provide such buyouts to their employees. Both seek the same buyout authority in order to manage their workforce as budget conditions and needs change. I very much support this bill for the Public Defender Service, the courts, and their employees. And I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes. The voluntary separation incentive payments allow agencies to reduce the size of their workforce in an effective and efficient manner. Agencies should be staffed only to the extent their work requires, and this bill authorizes the District of Columbia to offer buyouts to employees of the D.C. courts and public defenders. A CBO review of earlier, Congressional Budget Office review of an earlier version of this legislation that found in a 9-year period, voluntary separation incentive payments would have reduced personnel costs for the D.C. courts by roughly $25 million. I appreciate the gentlelady for bringing this bill forward. I am very encouraged by it. I support the bill and urge our members to support it as well. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings.
Mr. Chairman, I support this legislation which would grant the District of Columbia courts and public defenders Service the authority to offer voluntary separation incentive payments. Federal agencies currently have this authority, which is often helpful in right-sizing agency workforces. I wholeheartedly support the legislation and urge all our members to vote in favor of it. And with that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Does any other member wish to speak on the bill? Are there any amendments to the bill?
Mr. Chairman, I do have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 5037, offered by Ms. Norton of the District of Columbia.
Gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, is recognized for 5 minutes to explain the amendment. And without objection, the amendment is considered as read.
This is a simple amendment to the bill under discussion that will only make slight changes in the wording of the bill so that it is identical to existing law. Current federal law sets the cap for voluntary separation incentive payments at $25,000. My amendment would clarify that the substantially similar program created by the Joint Committee on Judicial Administration capped voluntary incentive payments at $25,000 also. This is a small change to a good bill, and I urge its adoption. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentlelady. I wholeheartedly support the amendment and willing to accept it. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If none, the question is now on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there any other further amendments to the bill? If none, the question is now on adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 5037 as amended to the House of Representatives. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. We're going to come back to Bill 5341, but let us go now to H.R. 5687, the GAO Mandates Revision Act of 2016. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 5687, the GAO Mandates Revision Act of 2016.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. Now I'd like to recognize the sponsor of the bill, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heist, for 5 minutes to explain the piece of legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we here in Oversight Committee probably know better than most other committees the important role that the GAO brings to the table. They have a vital mission, of course, to improve performance and accountability of the federal government, and by doing so, they bring a great benefit to the American taxpayer. In 2015, for example, the GAO's work resulted in an amazing result of roughly $134 for every $1 invested in the GAO. That came to about $74 billion in financial benefit in that 1 year alone. Since 2003, their benefit has resulted in over $600 billion. So this is an important department, an agency that brings a lot of good benefit to the table. I'm proud to be the author of the GAO Mandates Revision Act. It will ensure that the GAO will continue to efficiently and effectively assist Congress. As we all know, we here in Congress often include requirements in various pieces of legislation for the GAO to submit reports back to Congress or specific committees, and these reports are vital in conducting oversight as a whole. But over time, some of those reporting requirements simply become outdated or unnecessary, and that is what my bill addresses. By eliminating statutorily required GAO reports that are no longer needed or may be needed on a less frequent basis, the GAO is therefore able to redirect its resources to more time-sensitive congressional priorities. So it should be noted that this bill, H.R. 5687, incorporates bipartisan feedback from all committees of jurisdiction in both the House and the Senate. It's been a pleasure, Mr. Chairman, working with this committee's staff on the legislation, and I'm deeply grateful for all their hard work. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We now recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings.
Mr. Chairman, this is a simple, common-sense bill that would eliminate or modify certain outdated GAO reports currently mandated by statute. This will allow GAO to more efficiently use its resources and assist Congress more effectively. I appreciate the bipartisan, bicameral approach taken on this bill, and I wholeheartedly support it and would urge all of our members to vote in favor of it. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I also want to commend Mr. Heiss. Good work on this in building good bipartisan support in this. This is a bill that should become law sooner rather than later. It will be very helpful, and I urge its passage as well. Do any other members wish to speak on the bill? Does any member have an amendment to the bill? If none, the question is now on adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 5687 to the House of Representatives. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 5690, the GAO Access and Oversight Act of 2016. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 5690, the GAO Access and Oversight Act of 2016.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. Now I'd like to recognize the sponsor of the bill, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes to explain the legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the Government Accountability Office helps increase the transparency and effectiveness of our government and works to eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse. For example, over the past 6 years, GAO has identified over 200 areas of duplication, overlap, or fragmentation and recommended more than 600 corrective actions in these areas. Congress and federal agencies have addressed some of these actions, resulting in $125 billion in savings from 2010 through 2025. However, the GAO's effectiveness is tied to its ability to access federal agency records and fully audit government programs. This bill will allow GAO to access a critical database to help prevent fraud and eliminate improper payments in government programs. With full access to the National Directory of New Hires, GAO will have the necessary tools to better identify improper payments. This legislation sends a strong signal that no corner of the federal government should be exempt from thorough oversight and accountability. The bill is a good government accountability fix. I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan legislation, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize Mr. Cummings for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you. GAO provides invaluable aid to Congress in conducting our constitutional duty to oversee and evaluate the executive branch. To do its job effectively, GAO needs access to agency documents, materials, and other information. The bill before us would ensure GAO's access to the National Directory of New Hires, a valuable database of wage and employment information. Access to this database would assist GAO in its improper payment and fraud work, as well as in evaluating programs in which eligibility is means tested. The bill also would explicitly provide GAO with standing to pursue litigation if an entity in the executive branch improperly denies GAO access to information. These are needed reforms, and I urge my colleagues to support the bill. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. You can see that Mr. Carter's been able to build some good bipartisan support for this needed common sense bill. I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of it. And with that, I will yield back. Do any other members wish to speak on the bill? Are there any amendments to the bill? If none, the question is now on the adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 5690 to the House of Representatives. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Let us now go back to our next item for consideration is H.R. 5341. To amend Title V of the United States Code to provide for recalculation of basic annuity benefits for certain air traffic controllers. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 5341, to amend Title V United States Code to provide for recalculation of basic annuity benefits for certain air traffic controllers and for other purposes.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. Now I'd like to recognize the sponsor of the bill, the gentleman from Florida, the former chairman of the Transportation Committee, Mr. Mica, for 5 minutes to explain this legislation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And H.R. 5341 is a technical fix to existing law that will ensure that our experienced air traffic managers stay at the FAA for 30 years or more. This bill will help the FAA to meet its shortage of air traffic managers at facilities across the country, and it provides an enhanced annuity to air traffic managers. Jim Oberstar and I, the late former chair that preceded me, and I sponsored the similar legislation back in 2003 in Vision 100 to encourage air traffic managers to stay beyond the minimum retirement age of 50. We wanted to retain experienced managers. The law worked, and many of the managers opted to stay. Unfortunately, the law did work well until summer of 2015, when OPM unfortunately unilaterally reinterpreted existing law to reject FAA certification of air traffic managers for the retirement benefit. This is interesting because this bill language actually has been scored and saves $8 million over 10 years. So it's a bill that actually results in savings. So there's more we'll submit for the record, but and we've also gotten cooperation to have this in the FAA bill, and I urge its adoption.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize Mr. Cummings for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 5341 will clarify that first and second line air traffic controller managers who have completed 30 years of service eligible for enhanced retirement benefits under Vision 100, Century of Aviation Reauthorization Act, enacted in 2003. I want to thank Congressman Mica for his work on this measure and on the 2003 Act. The bill would ensure that annuities of the ATF managers be computed at 1.7% as opposed to the regular 1% accrual rate for each year of service in which the manager is engaged in the separation of air traffic. The enhanced pension benefits were intended by Congress to encourage retirement-eligible ATC managers to remain on the job. The Office of Personnel Management has interpreted the 2003 law to exclude ATF managers from being eligible to receive the higher pension benefits. The bill before us would provide technical corrections to the 2003 Act to clarify Congress's intent to cover these managers. This clarification is needed to help the Federal Aviation Administration address ATF ATC manager shortages. I urge my colleagues to support the bill, and with that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I, too, stand in support of this bill. I appreciate Mr. Micah's bringing this bill forward and urge its passage today. Do any other members wish to speak on the bill? Does any member wish to offer an amendment to the bill? If none, the question is now on the adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 5341 to the House of Representatives. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. In the opinion, those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Our next item under consideration is H.R. 5709, the Federal Records Modernization Act. The clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 5709, the Federal Records Modernization Act of 2016.
I ask unanimous consent the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. I'd like to thank Mr. Meadows for bringing this bill forward. It's a good quality bill. We've had plenty of time to review it, and I urge its passage. Does any other member wish to speak on the bill? Mr. Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Transparency is a bipartisan issue. The public has to have access to government information in order to hold the government accountable for its actions and inactions. This bill provides procedures for agencies to follow if an employee intentionally destroys records. When this committee considered a similar bill last Congress, I pushed to add a language that would ensure that employees investigated under provisions of the bill would have the same due process rights they have under current law. This bill includes those changes, and I appreciate that. The primary change this bill would make to current law would be to require the head of an agency to suspend an employee if the agency's Inspector General finds the employee willfully and unlawfully concealed or destroyed a Federal record. This bill also includes provisions of the Federal Register Modernization Act. These provisions would give the Office of Federal Registrar more flexibility to publish the Federal Register electronically. I intend to support this bill, and I hope that Mr. Chairman, that you will continue to take a bipartisan approach as this bill moves through the process. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Of course, we will continue to work on these important issues, and again, thank Mr. Meadows for his work on this. Do any other members wish to speak on the bill? Are there any amendments to the bill? If none, the question is now on the adoption and favorably reporting H.R. 5709 to the House of Representatives. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill is ordered favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. In the interest of time, we're going to move the following post office naming bills under unanimous consent agreement. We have consulted with the minority and have agreed to move these bipartisan bills expeditiously. We do have one member that would like to speak on the bills, and we will recognize him in just a moment. But I ask unanimous consent that the committee favorably report the following post office naming bills to the House of Representatives: H.R. 4887, H.R. 5356, and H.R. 5612. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heist, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm here really to speak in behalf of my fellow Georgian Budget Committee Chairman Tom Price, thanking him for introducing this piece of legislation to rename the Marietta, Georgia Post Office after Marine Lance Corporal Squire Skip Wells. The life of Lance Corporal Skip Wells is quite an inspiration, all the way leading to his death. He is a native son of Georgia. He did not fall on some far-off battlefield, but was killed tragically by some cowardly terrorists just about 100 miles from his birthplace, just outside of Atlanta. Lance Corporal Wells graduated from Sprayberry High School in 2012, where he played clarinet in the marching band. He was an active junior ROTC student with the U.S. Naval. Junior ROTC. He was beloved by all who knew him and will always be remembered as a young man who was willing to go anywhere to protect anyone. Following graduation, He attended Georgia Southern University before following a long family tradition of military service. He enlisted in the Marine Corps in 2014. He was a proud field artillery cannoneer. Lance Corporal Wells continually put the well-being of his fellow Marines and his mission before that of his own. On July 16, 2015, Lance Corporal Wells was just completing 2 weeks of training at the Naval Reserve Center in Chattanooga when a gunman opened fire on the compound. Without regard for his own safety, Lance Corporal Wells was last seen running to warn colleagues in the motor pool of the attack. He was only 21 years of age at the time of his death. The tremendous effect and impact of his death on the community was evident at the memorial service, where over 4,000 mourners filled the high school stadium in remembrance, and several thousand were outside the stadium. Lance Corporal Skip Wells was a proud Marine and a true hero. He made the ultimate sacrifice and selflessly gave his life to protect his fellow servicemen and our nation. And here we are approaching the 1-year commemoration of his death. I think the timing of this is quite significant. I would ask all of us to keep Lance Corporal Wells' family and friends in our thoughts and prayers on this memorial time. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back, urging support of this, the passage of this renaming.
I thank the gentleman, and there are some people in this world that are true heroes, and to honor Lance Corporal Wells that way, I think is very appropriate, and I appreciate you bringing that forward. Do any other members wish to speak on any of these bills?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Wholeheartedly support all of these bills, and Lance Corporal Wells, I hope that, you know, Mr. Chairman, so often what happens is we come up on the earth and we make our contributions. This young man, dying at 21 years old, gave his life, and it's so easy for people to, you know, to forget that he was here. And I think this is a wonderful way of memorializing his life. People who won't know him will see his name written there in the post office. Somebody will ask, who was he? And somebody will answer, and just the idea, the story of his life, hopefully will inspire somebody to give to their country. But more importantly, it'll be an inspiration for those coming behind him, because I think will build on his legacy. And I think, you know, a lot of times we do these post offices and we don't really think about how significant the namings are. But as I listened to the congressman, I could not help but be moved by that story, and I think it's quite appropriate. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Do any other members wish to speak on any of these bills? If not, without objection, H.R. 4887, H.R. 5356, and H.R. 5612 are favorably reported to the House. Without objection to pursuant Clause 2L of House Rule 11, members will have 2 days to submit views on the bills considered today. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be allowed to make necessary technical and conforming changes to the bills ordered reported today, subject to the approval of the minority. Hearing no objections, so ordered. If there's no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned.